evening, everyone. If you need a seat, our usher, Richard Ice, will show you to a seat.
Wow.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Ann Benninger, and I'm president of the College of St. Benedict. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the College of St. Benedict Koch Lecture and Interfaith Colloquium. The Koch Chair in Catholic Thought and Culture was established through the extraordinary vision and generosity of Barbara, Babs, and David Koch, cherished friends of the College of St. Benedict. An exemplary expression of the Catholic, Benedictine, and liberal arts mission of our college. The Koch Chair offers courses and provides diverse programming that help faculty, students, and the wider community better explore contemporary issues related to Catholic faith and culture by bringing the Catholic intellectual and cultural tradition into fruitful dialogue with the academic disciplines. Joining our faculty this year at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, and as the endowed chair of the College of St. Benedict Koch Chair in Catholic Thought and Culture, is Dr. Jennifer Besti. Dr. Besti taught previously at Xavier University in Cincinnati, Ohio, after receiving her PhD in religious ethics at Yale University in 2003. Her first book, God and the Victim, published by Oxford University Press, examines the challenges posed by trauma theory to Christian conceptions of the self, human freedom, and God's grace. Engaged now in separate book projects in Christian sexual ethics and in the field of childhood studies on the topic of children's justice within contemporary Catholicism, Dr. Besti brings to her love of the Catholic tradition a passion, energy, and inspired interdisciplinary commitment, all of which is more than evident in tonight's programming. It is my great pleasure to welcome Jennifer Besti and to have her introduce our distinguished guests for this evening's event, Sister Simone Campbell, Rabbi Amy Eilberg, and Nahid Khan. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, President Benninger. I also want to thank John Merkel, Director of the J. Phillips Center, for all of his help mentoring and in organizing and co-sponsoring this program tonight. It is an honor for me to introduce to you three women who are exemplary in their religious commitments and their pursuit of justice. We have Sister Simone Campbell, who will speak tonight about the U.S. economy and the faithful budget, and Rabbi Amy Eilberg and Ms. Nahid Khan, who from their Jewish and Muslim perspectives will reflect on this budget's priorities. Sister Simone Campbell is Executive Director of Network, a national Catholic social justice lobby. She is an influential religious leader, well known for her work on behalf of the marginalized and for her advocacy for systemic change in immigration, healthcare, economic justice, and peace. During the 2010 congressional debate on healthcare reform, Sister Simone wrote the highly influential Nuns letter in support of the Affordable Care Act. Many have commented that that was absolutely essential for passing this bill. And more recently, just last summer, she led the highly publicized and successful Nuns on the Bus tour, during which she and her fellow sisters educated Americans across the country about current economic injustices. They encouraged citizens and legislators, like Paul Ryan, to embrace the document, Priorities for a Faithful Budget, as a means to ensure greater economic justice for all. She likes to talk about the 100%. In the process, Sister Simone highlighted the important work of Catholic sisters everywhere, many are present here tonight, who tirelessly serve the poor and pursue social justice. Tonight's two other speakers share Sister Simone's compassion for those on the margins and for her passion for justice. Rabbi Amy Eilberg develops and facilitates programs for the J. Phillips Center for Interfaith Learning. She is well known as a leader in the Jewish healing movement and is deeply engaged in peace and reconciliation work, especially in connection to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Ms. Nahid Khan is a doctoral candidate in the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Minnesota, specializing in media coverage of religion in America. For 8 years, she served on the board of the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition, an interfaith advocacy group addressing social justice issues in Minnesota. Please join me in welcoming these distinguished women to our college community. And now to the podium, Sister Simone Campbell.
Well, what an honor to be here and receive such a warm Minnesotan welcome. I love it. I've said to many that I'm originally a Californian, and we had one member from Minnesota in our community, and to hear her tell it, I mean, this area is sort of like next to God. And she always had a holy hour on the weekend where she would listen to Garrison Keillor. So it does feel a bit like coming home. Thank you so much. Tonight I want to speak a bit about, obviously about the budget, about what we care about with the budget, but to lift up some of our Catholic social teaching, but also to lift up some of our experience from the bus. Because I must say that our experience last summer felt more like a lightning strike than anything else, because it was such a surprise, the electric quality of engaging people in our nation to talk once again about the needs of those at the margins, the struggle that everyone has to live in this challenging economy and in the richest nation on earth, to say, we're not bankrupt. The only thing we're bankrupt in is political will for making a difference. So what I want to do tonight is talk a little bit about Catholic social teaching, a little bit about what got the bus going, and then to give you some specific examples that relate to the budget and why it matters to us. And I'm going to sprinkle in a little poetry if I've got a little time. All this in less than, I don't know, whatever I've got. All right, so let's start with the challenge we're facing in our country right now, if you're following the news, is the beloved Congress has now engaged in this sequestration. One of the students this morning, when a class I was in was trying to remember it. It's one of the odder words that you could ever have, so leave it to Congress to come up with it. But the fact is, this was a ploy that was never to happen, because what the idea was, it was going to be so horrible that they would really be forced to do what they're paid to do, which is govern, and to resolve the conflicts. But we got caught in some of the 2014 election issues already, because some of the representatives don't want to make agreements with the other side because it'll be bad for their re-election campaign. I hope not governing is bad for their re-election campaign, but that's just my approach. So we are caught right now where our Congress is not functioning too well. Finally, the Violence Against Women Act finally passed. I mean, it was ridiculous that it got hung up. But I think what we have to do, and that's why this conversation about faith is so important, because this breaks barriers, can break barriers. Pope Benedict XVI, in his encyclical Charity and Truth, talks about the difference between justice and charity. And what he says is that you cannot have charity until you have justice. And justice means access to food, shelter, clothing, education, and basic health care as being required in our world to nurture the dignity of the individual. And so in our nation, where many politicians want us to think charity can take care of giving that food, shelter, and clothing, Pope Benedict really says, no, that's not possible. Until everyone has an access by right to the basics, you can't have charity. It's a very challenging statement. He also says that many in the Christendom fight this fight. You may recognize it. Those that are in favor of individual justice, especially identified as the pro or the anti-abortion, pro-life stance, is an individual stance, he says. And he says, and then there's the communitarian stance for social justice, and you stand for the community, for everyone being together. And he says that often, and this is certainly my experience, one who is oriented towards the pro-life anti-abortion position fights the communitarian justice position, and they go at it tooth and nail. You wouldn't know they were both Christian. Maybe they're not. But what he says is that both are grounded in love. And that what we need to do to recognize, or what we need to recognize, is that grounded in love, they are two sides of the same coin. And that rather than fighting each other, demanding that the other conform to my image and likeness of whichever is my favorite side, he says, no, what we have to do is to see that in love both are required. It's a very radical statement. Certainly not our experience within my experience within the United States. So tonight what I would like to do is try to touch this coin that is grounded in love. And I believe that the way we do that is in a scriptural or gospel context. And one of my favorite authors, I'm a lawyer, I'm not a theologian, so sorry, theology department, but never mind. But I was going to say religious studies department, but never mind. The challenge is, Walter Brueggemann says that the way to deal with the trying to create a community that comes out of this gospel base is he calls on us to do two things. First is to touch the pain of the world as real. Don't fix it, touch it, let it break our hearts. And the second is, if we let it break our hearts, we will have an active experience of hope. And what he says is we go astray in trying to protect our hearts, trying to hide from the pain of our time, and only in the richest nation on earth, I think, do we have the luxury of hiding from that reality. So the values of a faithful budget, here's our handy-dandy faithful budget. It was so much fun having it as a prop. It's also really good as reading. But the challenge of the faithful budget is to let us open our hearts to the struggle of our time and to let it affect our lives. Now, the miracle of the bus is this. The miracle of the bus is that the only reason the bus got going was that Catholic sisters were censured by the Vatican. And our organization, Network, was named as a suspect organization. And it all goes back to the healthcare fight that Jennifer mentioned, and the fact that we wrote the Nuns letter, and as one of the sisters who signed the Nuns letter said, "Oh, Simone, don't worry about it." What happened was the girls played the boys, the sisters played the bishops, and that the sisters won. And the boys are upset. But what happened was, the real problem, I think, is that the fear of the bishop's staff, not the bishops, but the bishop's staff, about the one side of the coin, about the issue of abortion, created their fear that there was federal funding for abortion in the Affordable Care Act, even though they said there wasn't. And that fear controlled them and didn't allow them to support it. And we believed the bill when it said no federal funding of abortion, and we also knew that 30 million people could have access to health care. For me, that was a pro-life stance, and one that I am proud of. But the gift of the Holy Spirit was that the censure from the Vatican gave us the notoriety that then we said, how do we use it for mission? And the idea for Nuns on the Bus came up. And so the Holy Spirit is alive and well and making mischief, I say. Making mischief. So at work we say, should we send the Vatican a thank you note? But this is part of touching the pain of the world is real, because there's another way in which that censure was painful. I mean, it was shocking. 9 of us at network. The Vatican thinks we're dangerous? There's a surprise. So let me invite you away from the Vatican issues, but to know that it's because of that we could go on the bus. And because of that, we could lift up the needs of people that struggle in our society. And because of that, for the first time in decades, our conversation as a nation became about those at the margins of society. And that, to me, is the glory of the Spirit's work. So I wanted to start with a couple of stories. And one is about Billy and his wife. And I told this story, I think, in class this morning, so I'm sorry if I repeat myself for some of you. You caught my earlier stories. But the reason I want to start with Billy is because Billy and his wife are an example of what's wrong in our nation. Billy and his wife were at St. Benedict the Moor dining room in Milwaukee. Some of you may know it. Every night they serve this fabulous meals, and they get volunteers in to do it. And Billy and his wife bring their 2 boys every night to St. Benedict's because they don't have enough money from their jobs to both put a roof over their head and food on the table. And so what Billy said was they decided that, yeah, they're working, and his wife's working full-time. Billy's hours had gotten cut back, but they're still in poverty. So they use food stamps during the day to feed the boys. And Billy said to me, well, you know, parents can eat maybe once a day, maybe twice a day, but growing kids, they need to eat at least 3 times a day. And his 14-year-old, I think he needed to eat a few more times than that, because he's one of those gangly, growing kids, you know. Well, Billy told me that what had happened when his hours were cut back is that was when they started using food stamps and going to St. Benedict's dining room. And he was so grateful. And I thought that Paul Ryan, who's Congressman Paul Ryan's budget, wants to eliminate working people from receiving food stamps. He says it's not necessary. But I knew that Billy needed food stamps to feed his family. And the other piece that I realized is working for minimum wage is that they're still in poverty. For minimum wage to have the same buying power it did in 1970, it would have to be about $12.50 an hour. So people are working and still poor. Currently, they're about 15% of the population is on food stamps, and the majority of them are working. It's the issue of wages. It's not the issue of dependents or takers. It's wages. And so what I realized was that food stamps in St. Benedict's dining room was not only what we could call a handout to Billy and his wife and the 2 kids, it was a handout to the employer. Because the employer is able to have a fed employee and pay low wages. And then I thought, oh my heavens, it's a handout to the consumer who then pays lower prices. If I am a consumer of those goods and services, benefit from Billy's and his family getting food stamps, eating at St. Benedict's dining room. And it made me realize to touch the pain of the world is real, is to touch the pain of the fact that we as a nation have chosen, rather than raising wages, we create a safety net. It's a choice that we've made. That's a painful reality for me, because in Catholic social teaching it says that the popes have said for decades that working people should be able to support their families with living wages, with sustainable living wages. So Billy's pain of trying to support his family is part of what's real. And the employer's pain of trying to make a go of it in a tough economy is part of what's real. So when we say we need to restore economic opportunity, we're right, but it's way more complex than just a single job. We're in this together. It is about the 100%. Let me tell you one more story about, which one? Oh, let me tell you about Shaisha, who I was just talking about to a reporter. And Shaisha grew up in foster care and never had a stable home. And then tried to go to college on her own without any supports at all, and ended up homeless, and then got involved in dealing some drugs because she was trying to make some money, and ends up on probation. And I mean, she was a mess. Luckily, she comes somehow, by some miracle of the Holy Spirit, to the Mercy Housing in Chicago. And at Mercy Housing, she discovers for the first time she has something to offer. She might be valuable. She has a safe home, people who care for her. And do you know what? She became a leader in her community, in the building where she is. She got a job where she could learn to manage her money and save some money. This past December, I found out she finished her BA finally. But it was all, and is now employed full-time, and is getting ready to move out of Mercy Housing. But Mercy Housing is a program that takes a little bit of federal money, well, some federal money, about half federal money, puts it together with grants, volunteers, all kinds of other donations, and makes these fabulous programs for young people who have never had a chance to know what it is to grow up in stability and experience something new. And have these flowering individuals where Mercy Housing tells me they have a 98% success rate. But it's because people care. People are engaged. It touches the pain of their lives, and it makes something new. It doesn't hide from it. It doesn't whitewash it. It doesn't make it go away. It touches it as real. So we need to prioritize these social services that make a difference in our society. We also need to ensure that there are adequate resources to pay for these programs. We have to be economic grown-ups. And the faithful budget calls us to be economic grown-ups. Now, we played this game in 2000. Some of you, most of us, a lot of us, no, not most of us, a lot of us are old enough to remember the 2000 election. And the big fight was over what were we going to do with the surplus? Remember that? How were we going to deal with the surplus? Well, the team that won the election was the ones that said, give it back. Give it back to the taxpayers. The other team had said, let's invest it in the future. Let's take care of future generations. Let's invest in infrastructure. Let's take care of folks in the future. Well, I don't want to say anything, but down the road there in St. Paul, you had a bridge collapse, which sort of it might have been a good idea to invest some of that in our infrastructure, just saying. But the team that won said, give it back. So there were 2 tax cuts. There were 2 tax cuts, but you know what? That would have been bad enough. But then there were 2 wars that we did not pay for. And if we want to do the analysis of why we're in the economic fix we're in right now, then we got to look at the facts. The facts is there were 2 tax cuts, there were 2 wars we didn't pay for, there was Medicare Part D that we didn't pay for, and those of us that have gray enough hair to be grateful for the pharmaceutical benefit, we didn't pay for it. It was irresponsible. And then we hit a recession. That combination created the economic chaos that we're in now. And the fact is, social service programs had nothing to do with it. But what do? Well, to be responsible, we need to raise taxes. We have to go back to where we were. So the faithful budget says a faithful way forward is responsible tax policy. We took a small step towards it. We got to take a few more steps to be responsible. And some people want us to think that taxes are just painful. Oh, it's painful, so we have tax relief. Well, I say just take 2 aspirin and go to bed for a while. The fact is, taxes are all about how we pay for what we value. How do we pay for who we believe we need to be as a society? How do we pay for being a democracy? Now, some would have us think, oh, we don't need government, get government off my back, there's no such thing as good government. Catholic social teaching tells us that the role of government is to offset the excesses of any culture. And in our culture, my friends, I would posit that, that's a pretty grown-up word, isn't it, posit. I would suggest to you that the fact is that in our culture, the excess is individualism. And that the challenge to individualism has got to be a communitarian valuing of each other, knowing that we're in this together. And so Catholic social teaching says we have to care for the whole group. We're responsible for all of us. And those of you that saw my speech at the Democratic Convention, I mean, I did say we are our sisters' keepers. We are our brothers' keepers. And that is who we are in our country. So we've got to pay for it. Okay, so we have to have economic opportunity. We have to pay for it responsibly. We need to prioritize the needs that build up those that are at the margins and are suffering. And finally, what I want to emphasize is that we need to make sure that there is health care for everyone, because we've got education, but we're not, I mean, here at St. Ben's, St. John's, you're doing a fabulous job. Public education's a little shaky. We got to talk about financing and good teaching, all that other important stuff. But the one that has the biggest opportunity right now, I think, to make significant progress is healthcare. Healthcare for those who do not have access. And I told the sisters this story, but I can't help but tell you this story. It's about Margaret, this is Margaret who died at 56 because she didn't have access to health care. Margaret lost her health care when she lost her job of 20 years. And when she lost her job, she didn't have access to screening, and she knew her family had a propensity to colon cancer. She ended up getting colon cancer and dying unnecessarily because she didn't have health care. If fully implemented, the Affordable Care Act would have prevented Margaret's death. We have to make sure that Medicaid is expanded to low-income people so that everyone, no more Margarets die. It's a pro-life stance. But what I also want you to know is that her sisters brought me this picture to our Nuns on the Bus in Cincinnati. We weren't too far from Xavier, in fact. And what they did was they came directly from her memorial service and wanted her to be with us. And so they brought me her picture, which I now carry in my Bible. But I was just so grateful. Then I was in Madison not too long ago, where her sisters live, and I found out my speaking about Margaret has had this wonderful effect for her family. They were so upset that she died unnecessarily, and she was pretty stubborn and independent, sort of like some Minnesotans I know, but she wouldn't ask for help, and they feel really bad about it. But my talking about her death has healed their family, because they make some meaning out of an otherwise ridiculous, unnecessary death. And because I speak about Margaret, and Margaret sustains me in my commitment to make sure Medicaid is fully implemented, isn't this wonderful? My speaking about her heals their family, and the healing of their family gives me more nourishment. That's the cycle that a faithful budget promotes, is that we benefit each other, even if we don't know it. Now, So what do? We have to touch the pain of the world as real. And what I'd like to do is to share a poem with you before I do my last piece. It's a poem about the challenge that we face right now. And it's actually a poem that both of these poems that I'm going to share came from my time in Iraq in 2002, but before we invaded. And we got caught in a sandstorm. Well, now a sandstorm in Iraq is sort of like what I understand a whiteout is, only worse, because the sand gets into the car and you start sneezing and coughing. Now, I have no idea if this would work, but our driver said that he had the experience of the windshield imploding because the sand blows so hard. And so I don't know if this will work, but he gave a roll of Scotch tape to Rick, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, said to him, if you see a crack starting to form, put a piece of Scotch tape on it to stop it. I don't know if it would have worked, but let me tell you, all eyes were riveted on the windshield. And what happened, I mean, it went on forever, and it would get light and dark, and I thought we would never get out of it, and we had to keep going on the highway because people would get killed if you stopped because cars couldn't see you and they'd run into you. So finally, what happened was we got to like a little edge of rain, maybe about 10, 15 drops wide. And what happened was we were instantly in desert clear. And this is the poem because they think this relates to the challenge that we're facing. And it's called Compassion's Path. We walk a sandstorm of impotence, isolated dread, the demons of our day. We walk a sandstorm of half-truths, lies of ochre, beige, tan, sepia confusion, pelted, buffeted by winds of war. We walk a sandstorm of drifting elusive truth, wandering ways, and blind following. We walk a sandstorm eroded by demanding doubt, overwhelmed by the horror swirling round, invading lungs and lives. We walk a sandstorm of promised grief, aching temptation to hunker down and hide until a more propitious time. But in this time of alluring weakness, in this time of fearful groaning, cold, blind logic, anger rising, remember the clear-eyed anchor of our resolve. Remember the eyes of Mayada, Sarah, Rita, Asan, Abdullah, Makbula, and many more. We may be blinded in that outward journey, but remember this inner core. May the eyes of family, terrors of family, set fire to our impotence, stoke our resolve, melt the cold stone of our hearts to yield to tears. For like rain, tears shed settle sandstorms. Like rain, tears shed clear the air. Like rain, tears shed reveal the path. So let us weep. Let us embody healing tears. Let us be copious tears to settle our country's storm. And I believe that that is the piece that our faithful budget is trying to do, is to try to settle our country's storm. And when you look at what's happening in our nation with the yelling heads, with the Fox News watchers and the MSNBC watchers and the CNN watchers, and they don't cross over. And then you watch what's happening on Capitol Hill, and I don't know if you know this, but when most of the speeches are given on Capitol Hill, there's nobody else in the chamber, right? That's why Congress keeps passing rules so the camera can't pan the audience, because nobody's there. And they don't want it. They listen in their offices, they say. But what I think is the real trouble is that we don't talk to each other. We have lost the capacity to have conversation across our differences. We think that the only way forward is my way. Well, unfortunately, you don't all agree with me, and I know I'm right. So I guess I don't have to talk to you. I just have to wait for you to catch up with me. Isn't that how it goes? I don't know about you, but I have a brother, Jim, who believes a lot differently than I do. And you just can't, we just don't talk about this stuff. But I really think that if we're faithful to the budget, a faithful budget, that we've got to find a way to faithfully talk to each other at the same time. And I believe that Congress needs to get their act together, that's true. But I don't think that's going to happen until we the people wake up. It's about we the people coming together to form this more perfect union. It's about we the people saying, solve it. It's about we the people saying, we're better than this. And it's about we the people saying, we're in this together. We cannot do this alone. And if our democracy is going to work, remember it's an experiment, then we're still experimenting. If our democracy is going to work, then I believe all of us, from whatever faith we come from, or from no faith at all, have got to be willing to put our hand in and to know that we're in this together. Because by being in it together, then it means we all have something to contribute and we all have something to receive. And it's only together that we can really make a difference for our nation. So what we need to be aware of is that a faithful budget, it's a call to Congress, but it's a call to all of us to be responsible for our nation. Because the hard thing about democracy is that democracy takes work. You can't be a couch potato. And one of the things that our media does, sorry media that's here, but they like to say that it's like a sporting game. Did you notice that during the campaign? You do a debate and, who scored a point, who's down for the count, who committed a foul, who's out of the game, all those kinds of images. But what that does is that makes us spectators. And as spectators, I love it. I can buy tortilla chips, which are my favorite sinful food ever. And I can eat tortilla chips, have a little guacamole, ooh, nice, watch the returns, and then it's over. But the fact is, it's not over. If we're going to make our democracy work, we, the people of the United States, need to form this more perfect union. And I come at it from a place of faith, but you all come at it from different places. But wherever it is that you come from, we must have our roots firmly grounded in values and then meet in the Constitution so that we can form this more perfect union and establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, and promote the general welfare, not the welfare of the top 1%, the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty for all of us. So for me, this is all about the spiritual truth that we are one body. But it gets expressed in the civic shared commitment that we the people are in this together. So to conclude, I'd like to share one last poem that comes from my time in Iraq, and it's called Incarnation. And we were there just before Christmas. And you have to know that this one happened because our last night in Baghdad, we went to an Italian restaurant, if you can believe it. And we came back to our hotel, and there was light from a plate glass window, and there was a wedding party on the sidewalk using the benefit of the light from the window. And they were dancing. They had this old creaky accordion and a violin that I think only had 3 strings, but I'm not sure. And we got invited in to dance with the wedding party. And this man dancing next to me, I'm not a dancer, I'm a poet, but I tried. And the man dancing next to me leans over and says, "How long do my niece and her new husband have to live in peace? How long until you start bombing us?" Whoa, I had no answer. But this is the poem that was given, and it struck me, we are in this together globally. And so this is my prayer for us, that we, the people of the United States, may know the amazing reality of incarnation, which is at the heart of our Christian faith. And then we're going to hear from my sisters, their views. But it goes like this. Let gratitude be the beat of our heart, pounding Baghdad rhythms, circulating memories, meaning of this journey. Let resolve flow in our veins, fueled by Basra's destitution, risking reflective action in a 15-second world. Let compassion be our hands, reaching to be with each other, all others, to touch, hold, heal this fractured world. And let wisdom be our feet, bringing us to the crying need, to friends or foe, to share this body's blood. Let love be our eyes, that we might see the beauty, see the dream, lurking in the shadows of despair and dread. And let community be our body warmth, radiating Arab energy to welcome in the foreign stranger, even the ones who wage this war. And let us remember on drear distant days, we are a promised Christmas joy. We live as one this tragic, gifted life, for we are the body of God. Thank you very much.
Well, I have a pretty, I'm shorter than you are. I have a very, very easy job. Mostly I just want to cheer Sister Simone on in her work. It is such an honor and a delight to get to spend an evening with you and to discover a sense of sisterhood across religious boundaries. John Merkel asked me whether I had the time to come up. I don't know. You know, it's a long drive from St. Paul. And I said, to meet Sister Simone Campbell? Are you kidding? So it's really a joy. And I knew about your work before. I watched you at the Democratic National Convention. But I didn't understand until actually seeing you in person why Stephen Colbert clearly was so delighted to have you not once, but twice. If this room were filled with all Jews, and you need to know that rooms full of Jews don't agree about much. We have this thing that we think is unique, this expression, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Gets a laugh every time. Do Catholics say the same thing? Anyway. If this were a group of Jews, given that it's surprising for groups of Jews to agree about important things, and I asked them, what are the most important values in the Torah? There would be some outlier answers, but there would be a cluster of agreement around the following set of values. Let me start with justice, because in response to Cardinal Ratzinger's teaching, the Pope's teaching. Did you quoted it from before he was Pope, I think. Forgive me. Pope Benedict's. Sorry, Pope, but he's still Pope Emeritus. Pope Benedict's teaching about the indivisibility of justice and charity. In Hebrew, there is literally no difference between justice and charity. Charity, the word charity, in the sense of from the root for love, doesn't exist in the same way in Hebrew. You know the passage, justice, justice shall you pursue. The Hebrew word is tzedek, and the word usually translated charity, really incorrectly translated as charity, is tzedakah. So philanthropy, gifts to correct social ills and gifts to the needy are quite literally indivisible, indistinguishable from acts of justice. So large numbers of Jews would agree correctly that what is central in the Torah is a cluster of values including justice, human dignity, care for the needy, the requirement to attend to the needs of community, fairness and equity for all beings, for all persons created in the image of God, no exceptions, and principles of loving kindness and of peace and of care for creation. The list that I just gave is honestly the answer that that groups of Jews would give me, and it's also straight out of the table of contents of the priorities for a faithful budget. Really, I spent last evening reading this, and I really commend it to all of you. It would be a great course in theologies of justice, just to study it and to go deep with it. It just made my heart sing, both to see that the values were exactly the same values. That's really not much of a surprise that Jews and Catholics, particularly progressive Jews and progressive Catholics, have so much in common. What felt a little more surprising and very much worthy of celebration was the way in which this document manages to bring spiritual values and civic values together. All of the things that I value as a Jew, and the things that I value as an American citizen, as a small d Democrat, in the loving, faithful, reflective language, not the language of late-night talk shows and what passes for a political dialogue. This document presents them as the same language, as the same set of values. At the JRLC, the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition, interreligious coalition that works on these kinds of issues down in Minneapolis, St. Paul, one often hears the language of the budget as a moral document, which in itself I find very exciting. But this is about the budget as a spiritual document, as a religious document. This document offers all of us the possibility of bringing who we are as people of faith and who we are as American citizens together with penetrating wisdom and sophisticated analysis brought together. Now, I have to say that just one thing made me nervous about this document. It says, the title is Priorities for a Faithful Budget. The subtitle is Acting with Mercy and Justice as One Nation Under God. I love the acting with mercy and justice brought together with the civic context. The term One Nation Under God makes me a little bit nervous, partly because I know the history of the insertion, as do you, of the insertion of the expression under God into the Pledge of Allegiance. It doesn't go back to the Bill of Rights, contrary to popular belief. These words were inserted in response to the Red Scare in the 1950s, not the greatest era in our nation's history. So the reverence with which people regard the phrase "one nation under God" is actually suspect. And now from hearing you speak, I know that we agree about this, but I feel nervous when people raise the perspectives of religious traditions in the public square without remembering that we Americans have a great variety of religions, very different faiths, and people of no faith or of questioned faith, or faith in all kinds of things that don't find institutional representation. So there's a little bit of a cautionary note for me here in whether some people might misunderstand this as the way that Americans should think about the place of faith in the public square. But bracketing that and understanding that it is quite a wonderful phrase in some ways, to the extent that this document represents a really fine way to bring the voice of progressive religion into the public conversation in the United States about how we ought to run our country and how we ought to share and allocate our resources. It really is an example of the best of what that process can be. I thought that I should bring you a piece of Torah. I should give you a particular text about how Torah speaks about issues of justice and equity and care for the needy and community. And I just couldn't figure out how to do that in 8 minutes, in the 8 minutes that was allotted to me, because I thought I should have a Bible at hand. I could literally open the Torah to any page and find an example. So how could I possibly choose? So as a rabbi, what I have to choose is this week's piece of Torah. We have portions of the week, something like what you call the lectionary. So Jews all around the world, last week, Friday night or Saturday morning, read the same section of Exodus, including the story of the golden calf. And this coming Friday night or Saturday morning, read the last chapters of the book of Exodus. So we are in this moment in the Jewish cycle of encounter with biblical text, of moving from the sin of the golden calf to the construction of the desert sanctuary. Last week was about a celebration of idolatry. It arose from understandable human reasons of fear and so on, and yet Jewish tradition regards it as the ultimate in apostasy. It seems to me, in the context that brings us together tonight, we as a nation have all kinds of choices to continue to commit acts of adultery, that too.
That was biblical too.
Yeah. I thought I meant to say acts of idolatry. That's another subject, but idolizing greed and ideological purity and partisan politics and distorted notions of individualism and individual freedom and partisanship. We can continue to worship those idols in this country, or we can move forward as the Torah does. And as some rabbinic commentaries say, that perhaps God, in all God's wisdom, somehow didn't fully understand how hard it would be for a people just freed from slavery to understand how to worship a God that was beyond imagining, that was invisible. And so it's in response, some of these commentaries say, it's in response to the sin of the golden calf that God understands that the people need a portable sanctuary to carry with them in their travels through the desert. So if we want to reject the idolatries of our time, we have to instead put all of our energy and all of our collective wisdom and capacity for understanding justice and love to build a sanctuary together, a sanctuary which can include rich and poor, men and women and children, people of all religions and no religion, Democrats and Republicans and libertarians, whoever they may be, so that we may move forward creating a sanctuary in which the sacred and the valuable may dwell for all of us together, and that sanctuary can move us forward to the best of who we can be as Americans. Thanks.
Should have worn higher heels. Well, good evening. Let me begin my response with first sharing wishes for peace to be with you all, which I'm sure you all know is expressed in the Arabic language as Assalamu alaikum. It is my honor to join my Jewish sister, Rabbi Amy Eilberg, and be the Muslim respondent to a tireless advocate for peace and social justice, our Catholic sister, Simone Campbell. Her inspiring work to draw attention to moral priorities when thinking about our nation's economy and when planning our national budget is visionary in its emphasis on interreligious collaborations and interfaith communication. I appreciate her work and the work of her colleagues to speak truth to power and also to follow her conscience in setting priorities for the work she's guided to do, to draw compassionate attention to the needs of the vulnerable amongst us. As a member of a minority American religion, my first response is to appreciate the First Amendment freedoms that enable her to do this work, in partnership with a diverse array of religious organizations and communities that set such an example for the rest of us. I think we can never hear the wording of Article 1 of the Bill of Rights enough times. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. As an American Muslim who is also a student of communication, interested in journalistic and artistic expression through various mediated forms, and particularly concerned about protecting human rights, I look at Sister Simone's work and admire the extent to which she and her colleagues combine all clauses of the First Amendment. I won't deliver a lecture on this, although I'm tempted to do so, but I invite you to reflect on the importance of this as a take-home assignment, with both political significance and spiritual meaning. As you might guess, I am very interested in what it takes to effectively communicate information and ideas, so therefore I have great respect for the blending of values and evidence I see in the faithful budget. Often, people with religious commitments frame their positions in faith, values, ethics, morals, and philosophy using discourses that are mainly scriptural in origin. This can tend to result in a dismissal of the argument being made because it is religious. In this case, however, the faithful budget is not so easy to dismiss, given its firm grounding in facts, statistics, and other evidence to support its call, not only to evaluate the principles for the nation's budget, but also to advocate specific policy proposals and the reasoning behind them. By blending the philosophy of our nation as a democracy with freedom, fairness, and equality for all its peoples, with the moral vision of our nation's many religious communities, grounding it in the values of the First Amendment, and supporting it ethically with solid information, the faithful budget delivers a comprehensive message about what our economic responsibilities are as citizens, taxpayers, neighbors, and indeed as members of a national family. The recognition that ultimately we are neighbors in society underlies much policy planning, and I am sure this philosophical approach resonates effectively with most of us as fellow human beings. The faithful budget goes beyond that and uses the language of siblinghood, sisters and brothers. Obviously, this is a powerful step forward in thinking about our relationship to each other, especially when it comes to policy planning. The language of siblinghood certainly resonates with me because in my Muslim culture, we address one another as sister and brother. Of course, we adjust for generational differences, and elders are often addressed as aunt or uncle, or even as mother or father. Our juniors are often addressed as daughter or son. I know that such forms of address are common to many cultures, and so I couldn't help but reflect on the question of how we might approach moral policy planning if we took the next step from the language of siblinghood to the language of parenthood. Now, I'm far from qualified to address, or shall we say debate, the subject of any parental role of government when it comes to a socially just approach to the national budget, but the social justice approach certainly resonates with me. And thoughts about the language of parenthood come from growing up as a Muslim and then developing my Islamic religious commitments over time during adulthood, because my thoughts have been influenced by the Quran's many calls for just treatment of orphans. Orphans are perhaps the most helpless of all people, and how a society treats them is the ultimate barometer of how much or how little justice exists in that society. Perhaps the emphasis on caring for orphans in Muslim social teachings derives from the fact that Prophet Muhammad was himself an orphan. His father died a few months before his birth, and his mother died when he was but 2 years of age. He was acutely aware of how fortunate he was that he had a loving grandfather to care for him until the age of 6, and after his grandfather's death, a devoted uncle who raised him to adulthood, and, in fact, who stood by him supportively and protectively well into the Prophet's middle age. In the Quran, God reminds Prophet Muhammad of the divine care and blessings he received, particularly in childhood, that led him from his orphan status to a secure position in society before the time he was called to prophethood. Without such care and protection, delivered in the form of loving family members who took on the responsibility of parental substitutes, Prophet Muhammad most certainly would have died as a child. In his prophetic life, he constantly reminded his followers to follow the example of such parental substitutes as he experienced, and take care of orphans, and not just the orphans of one's own family, but all orphans, to protect their inheritance and to raise them to responsible adulthood. He taught that this was one of the very highest of duties and the most rewarded by God. The orphan motif is one of the most powerful motifs amongst Muslims in discussions about putting Islamic faith in practice and in bringing about social justice in the Muslim setting. It is particularly powerful when telling the story of Prophet Muhammad's childhood experience as an orphan with Muslim children and young adults, and sharing ideas about what it might mean for us today. The motif of caring for the orphan is not one I hear in the larger society, American society, perhaps because other traditions highlight other very powerful motifs of the less fortunate amongst us and how to take care of the responsibilities between us. Yet, in my small experience with working with the less fortunate, and from what I have learned from the great experience of people who have devoted their lives to this work, I have observed that many of the vulnerable in our community and society are, in a sense, orphans. It is not unusual to learn, when listening to the life stories of vulnerable people, that not a few lost one or more parents at a young age through death, abandonment, or other reasons. This is particularly true of prison inmates. Given this observation, when I now read of the Quranic call to care for orphans, I wonder what the challenge of this call is today, and now in relation to the philosophy behind the work to develop and advocate for the moral priorities of the faithful budget. We may immediately think of the stereotypical image of little children needing help when we think of orphans, but there is another level of reality to the matter of orphans, the large number of adults in difficulties or in trouble who also are orphans, literally or figuratively. We can envision the vulnerable as our neighbors and as our sisters and brothers when developing moral public policy. But what further needs might be addressed if we
envisioned at least some of the vulnerable as orphans who have come into our care and need our protection. I certainly don't have the answers, but I respectfully leave you with questions about what it means to care for and protect the orphans amongst us. Khuda Hafiz, which in the Urdu and Persian languages means, may God protect us all.
Thank you so much, Sister Simone, Rabbi Amy, and Nahid. I think we're all probably blown away by how rich this has been. And I now invite you to please ask questions. What's in your hearts and what's in your mind right now? What I most respect about these women is that they tell it like it is. Okay? So you do the same. And I know we have many. I was so impressed with our students at this workshop on the Faithful Budget last week with Matt Lindstrom. And there's students who have such awesome questions. So, but I invite all of you. So please, jump in.
Hello, my name is Lucas Ramsey. I'm a junior here, and I guess one of my curiosities that I had when I heard about the Faithful Budget is I'm wondering how it addresses things like scientific research and other types of development on that front.
The short answer is it doesn't. The Faithful Budget was pulled together by the interfaith community in Washington, D.C., and most of us lobby more on the human service, international development, healthcare delivery, that panoply of issues. And so the issue of the Department of Education or science research, we didn't touch. We're trying to do a 2.0, a follow-on, and so I'll take it back the idea of maybe possibly including it, but we didn't want to do something that we didn't have an expertise in, and so we just want to put it in to put it in. But I have to say, just because I can't help myself, is that the insights that you two had gave me insights into this document that we've done that were like surprises. So I can hardly wait to get back. I'm going to have to email everybody and say, do you know what people found in this? We didn't know we wrote it. It's fabulous. So thank you.
May I ask a question?
Sure. Oh,
right here.
Yes.
So some people like to emphasize that America is a place of the separation of church and state. And for some people, that means the religious people should stay out of politics. I don't agree with that myself, but I'd love to hear Sister Simone, and for that matter, I would love to hear our other speakers respond to that challenge.
We heard the First Amendment. I mean, the First Amendment is government shall do nothing to impede the practice of religion. But Thomas Jefferson wrote about the importance of religious people bringing their values to the civic square, and that it's really important that people of values, with values, shape what we do, is what he called us to. And so the misconception is, and I think this may be convenient on the part of some who would rather have us check our values at the door so we don't do these pesky moral issues, but that we're really challenged to bring what we value to the dialogue, to the discourse. So, I don't know, Amy, do you want?
Well, I do, particularly as a member of a religious minority in the United States. It seems to me that one of the things that has emerged out of understanding of the First Amendment is something in the ethic of America, not America as Christian nation, which is really not true in history, and certainly not currently. But something has developed almost an ethic of religious diversity, of embrace of religious diversity, has become part and parcel of American public life, and a sense that religion plays in the free and open marketplace of ideas in America, and that although the First Amendment doesn't actually require it, in America we embrace diversity. So as a Jew, I do find it offensive when a public figure presumes to speak for all Americans as if they were all Christian, or to speak of his or her religious faith as if everyone, or his or her construction of religious values as if everyone should adopt it. So for me, as I said before, certainly the First Amendment is not, I shouldn't talk about the amendment in presence of a lawyer, but the First Amendment is not about protecting America from religion. But it does have something, I think, to do with protecting Americans from religious supremacism and intolerance.
That's interesting. Do you want to?
Well, I'm not really sure as a member of another religious minority that I could really improve upon Rabbi Amy's response. But I think I would probably just say that my understanding of the history of how the First Amendment has been, practiced is really that it's enabled people of many different backgrounds to sort of come together and work together, recognizing that their individual religious rights are protected, but that their religious values and perspectives certainly have a place in the public discussion and public square, and that's a valuable thing to offer to the nation amongst many other perspectives. And these should all be sort of openly discussed and debated and evaluated for determining, what we want to do with them when we develop and implement any sort of public policy. So, I think, we don't and are never going to have an official religion. So I think, as Rabbi Amy said, that's the main concern, is to make sure that that doesn't happen and be careful about where the line is on that. And so I think that would be my response.
Can I add one piece, because you make me think of it, that the Faithful Budget 2.0, we've had the Sikh community now join the Interfaith community in Washington. And what I discovered was, I don't know anything about the Sikhs. And so it takes work to work on language, understanding, stretching, finding the place where the common ground is, and at the same time allowing all of the members to hold on to their essences. And so you have to be well rooted in the values so that we can find out where those values coincide. And then how do we find common language that is respectful of all? It's work. And we had a lot of fights to do the first one. So I'm hoping we don't have as many fights to do the second budget, but together. But I don't want you to think, oh, that's a lovely document, easily done. It's not. It's hard work.
All right, we have time for one or two more questions. Is there anything pressing?
Right here. I think I was first
Okay.
after that. I want to thank you all for coming to speak. My name is Tiffany Vang. I'm a senior Peace Studies major. I have kind of a two-part question. The first one is just coming from different backgrounds. Are there any differences in the priorities that you have in terms of economic justice, whether it's from education, affordable housing, or to healthcare? Second part would be that seeing that U.S. foreign aid is about, I guess, less than 1%, and on the chopping block, is that a priority for our country or priority for all of ourselves in terms of social justice on a larger scale? So I'm wondering what your opinions are to that. Feel free to answer whichever one.
Speaking for D.C., in D.C., the division among the various issues like health care, safety net, all of those issues, it goes by which staff lobbies on what issues. It doesn't go by denominations. I mean, within the network staff, I mean, if you talk to Marge, who does safety net, that's the most important one you've ever seen. Talk to Mary Ellen, who does healthcare expansion. My gosh, you can't have anything unless you got healthcare expansion. And talk to me, I do immigration. That's obviously the most important one. So it breaks down more by where our passions are, and then we work in working groups with, like the Interfaith Immigration Coalition is a wide cross-section of the faith community that works on immigration reform, so we're clearly the best, because I'm part of it. But if you talk to the healthcare group, they'd say the same thing. So it's just which issue do you work on, and we try at the office level to make sure that all get addressed, and they're all special children, so they all get lifted up. I don't know if anybody wants to. And the other part, though, I lost the other part. International. Oh, the international. The one thing we did decide on the 2.0 is to add a paragraph about international just because it's so important. The fact is people think we give 10% of our budget to international aid. It's less than 1%. It's about 0.7%. And of that, half of that is military aid. So that passes as development. Another piece with development, though, that we've got is that because the military has seen that it's really important to have development as a part of real security, that's a piece that we're beefing up in here, is that, and because Congress won't pass money for USAID, don't ask me why, but they won't. And so what they do is they now give money for development to the military who doesn't really know what to do with it. And so they just give it out to people. It's been very ineffective. It's been a big waste. But it's just because Congress can't pass aid budget for State Department. And for reasons I don't understand, they don't like Congress doesn't like the State Department. So they think it's wishy-washy. It's called diplomacy, for God's sakes. So the effort is to bolster a realistic, what we call 3D security, where you do diplomacy, development, and then as a last resort is the military defense. But it's hard in Congress to do that.
Okay, let's take one more question, and then I know our speakers have to drive to St. Paul tonight.
Oh, there's that.
Is there anyone else?
Yep, I got it. Great. All right. Hi, I just want to say thank you to the three panelists for coming tonight. Sister Simone, you talked in your speech about how we have Fox News listeners and CNN watchers and MSNBC, and it seems like throughout this past election, the real problem has been this divide between the two sides, and you have to pick a side and you can't cross over. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you think we can address that problem and how that will impact reaching towards the faithful budget.
Good question. Well, I was advocating sort of facetiously that the Affordable Care Act should include brain transplants as a way to get over it. The fact is... yeah, for whom? That was going to be the question, right. Maybe for me, so I wouldn't care so much. The place where I have found a capacity to connect across difference is really at that place of values, where I can respectfully listen to another's point of view and get to the point where I find out what do they value, what matters, how is it that you see the world that you think that is a good response. Because often what I found out is I was fighting programs, and we should have a safety net, we shouldn't have a safety net, we should have a safety net, we shouldn't have a safety net. But if you get below that, how do we support the dignity of each individual? How do you, Billy and his family, how do you support Billy and his family who's working but not making enough at minimum wage to care for his family? I want Billy and his family to live in dignity. Do you? That was sort of a setup question, but do you? And then you ask, well, what would help Billy and his family live in dignity? How could we accomplish that? So you come to values to try to find shared goals, not programs. We fight over programs. But when you come to that value place, to the reverence, of the dignity of the individual, the caring for those who have different beliefs, the room for everybody at the table, democracy, patriotism. And then I had this person tell me that a potential funder came and said that a person from the Heritage Foundation, which is a really conservative think tank, said, you know, the problem with you progressives is that you won't talk about God, family, or the country, patriotism. And I thought, oh my glory, that is exactly what Nuns on the Bus talked about, was God, family, and the country. And maybe that was why it was so electric. So I've begun to think, if we can talk about those values, that maybe there are more bridges to be built, because we all do care about those things. So I don't know. That's my thought at this point. Go to values. Go to that. What do you all think? How do we bridge this?
I gave a whole talk about this.
Oh, good.
Was it 2 weeks ago at St. John's? So I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, in 2 minutes.
Well, in 2 minutes, I would say values and human story.
Story. Yeah.
We fight about the facts, about solutions. The problem with our society is that it's so much not face-to-face.
Good point.
The things that we can say, you write off a quick email or a nasty comment. You see the story in the New York Times, this story stinks, about how our brains really are affected by the negative talkbacks that we read on Facebook. We say things on Facebook that we would never say to a person face-to-face. So that's one part of it. Not to go on and on, I think everyone should read a book by a psychologist named Jonathan Haidt. It's H-A-I-D-T. I thought, God help us, it can't be hate, because it's really an important book about civic consciousness. H-A-I-D-T, Haidt, called Righteous Minds,
yes,
which is an extraordinarily enlightening analysis of why it's so hard for people on the left and people on the right to talk with one another. And some of his insights, I think, really open the door to some greater understanding.
Well, I'm in communication, so this is a topic dear to my heart. And I found that establishing relationships, although very challenging with people who diametrically see the world differently from you, or maybe dislike you from the moment they lay eyes on you and want to reject whatever you have to say, or even your presence there, that it might be challenging and difficult, but patience, kindness, some empathy. I've learned that people who maybe come at you with a lot of hostility they're having some issues. And just being sort of kind and calm and quiet, and letting them speak and asking them about what's on their mind and what's important to them, what do they want in this life, that sort of thing. You're taking a kind of conversational, calm track can really open people up and reduce, that kind of desire to fight. But it does take quite a bit of patience on your part, and you have to take a little bit of abuse. So, it's kind of how much are you willing to take, at any given point, We're all human after all.
Amen.
So, we all have to pick our situations as we can handle them. So I won't say I've got, the perfect answer, but I think maybe between the three of us and maybe a lot of other wise people in this room, you can come to approaches that work for you and help you in your work in the community.
Good.
Well, thank you so much. And could you all join me in thanking them for coming? And thank you for coming out.
together. But I don't want you to think, oh, that's a lovely document, easily done. You know, it's not. It's hard work.
All right, we have time for one or two more questions. Is there anything pressing?
Right here. I think I was first
Okay.
after that. I want to thank you all for coming to speak. My name's Tiffany Vang. I'm a senior peace studies major. I have kind of a two-part question. The first one is just coming from different backgrounds. Are there any differences in the priorities that you have in terms of economic justice, whether it's from education, affordable housing, or to healthcare? Second part would be that seeing that U.S. foreign aid is about, I guess, less than 1%, and on the chopping block, is that a priority for our country or priority for all of ourselves in terms of social justice on a larger scale? So I'm wondering what your opinions are to that. Feel free to answer whichever one.
Speaking for D.C., in D.C., the division among the various issues like health care, safety net, all of those issues, it goes by which staff lobbies on what issues. It doesn't go by denominations. I mean, within the network staff, I mean, if you talk to Marge, who does safety net, that's the most important one you've ever seen. Talk to Mary Ellen, who does healthcare expansion. My gosh, you can't have anything unless you got healthcare expansion. And talk to me, I do immigration. That's obviously the most important one. So it breaks down more by where our passions are, and then we work in working groups with, like the Interfaith Immigration Coalition is a wide cross-section of the faith community that works on immigration reform, so we're clearly the best, because I'm part of it. But if you talk to the healthcare group, they'd say the same thing. So it's just which issue do you work on, and we try at the office level to make sure that all get addressed, and they're all special children, so they all get lifted up. I don't know if anybody wants to. And the other part, though, I lost the other part. International. Oh, the international. The one thing we did decide on the 2.0 is to add a paragraph about international just because it's so important. The fact is people think we give 10% of our budget to international aid. It's less than 1%. It's about 0.7%. And of that, half of that is military aid. So that passes as development. Another piece with development, though, that we've got is that because the military has seen that it's really important to have development as a part of real security, that's a piece that we're beefing up in here, is that, and because Congress won't pass money for USAID, don't ask me why, but they won't. And so what they do is they now give money for development to the military who doesn't really know what to do with it, and so they just give it out to people. It's been very ineffective. It's been a big waste. But it's just because Congress can't pass aid budget for State Department. And for reasons I don't understand, they don't like Congress doesn't like the State Department. So they think it's wishy-washy. It's called diplomacy, for God's sakes. So the effort is to bolster a realistic, what we call 3D security, where you do diplomacy, development, and then as a last resort is the military defense. But it's hard in Congress to do that.
Okay, let's take one more question, and then I know our speakers have to drive to St. Paul tonight.
Oh, there's that.
Is there anyone else?
Yep, I got it.
Great.
All right. Hi, I just want to say thank you to the three panelists for coming tonight. Sister Simone, you talked in your speech about how we have Fox News listeners and CNN watchers and MSNBC, and it seems like throughout this past election, the real problem has been this divide between the two sides, and you have to pick a side and you can't cross over. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you think we can address that problem and how that will impact reaching towards the faithful budget.
Good question. Well, I was advocating sort of facetiously that the Affordable Care Act should include brain transplants as a way to get over it. The fact is... yeah, for whom? That was going to be the question, right. Maybe for me, so I wouldn't care so much. The place where I have found a capacity to connect across difference is really at that place of values, where I can respectfully listen to another's point of view and get to the point where I find out what do they value, what matters, how is it that you see the world that you think that is a good response. Because often what I found out is I was fighting programs, and we should have a safety net, we shouldn't have a safety net, we should have a safety net, we shouldn't have a safety net. But if you get below that, how do we support the dignity of each individual? How do you, Billy and his family, how do you support Billy and his family who's working but not making enough at minimum wage to care for his family? I want Billy and his family to live in dignity. Do you? That was sort of a setup question, but do you? And then you ask, well, what would help Billy and his family live in dignity? How could we accomplish that? So you come to values to try to find shared goals, not programs. We fight over programs, but when you come to that value place, to the reverence of the dignity of the individual, the caring for those who believe have different beliefs, the room for everybody at the table, democracy, patriotism. And then I had this person tell me that a potential funder came and said that a person from the Heritage Foundation, which is a really conservative think tank, said, you know, the problem with you progressives is that you won't talk about God, family, or the country, patriotism. And I thought, oh my glory, that is exactly what Nuns on the Bus talked about, was God, family, and the country. And maybe that was why it was so electric. So I've begun to think if we can talk about those values, that maybe there are more bridges to be built, because we all do care about those things. So I don't know. That's my thought at this point. Go to values. Go to that. What do you all think? How do we bridge this?
I gave a whole talk about this.
Oh, good.
Was it 2 weeks ago at St. John's? So I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, in 2 minutes.
Well, in 2 minutes, I would say values and human story.
Story. Yeah.
We fight about the facts, about solutions. The problem with our society is that it's so much not face-to-face. The things that we can say, you write off a quick email or a nasty comment. You see the story in the New York Times, this story stinks, about how our brains really are affected by the negative talkbacks that we read on Facebook. We say things on Facebook that we would never say to a person face-to-face. So that's one part of it. Not to go on and on, I think everyone should read a book by a psychologist named Jonathan Haidt. It's H-A-I-D-T. I thought, God help us, it can't be hate, because it's really an important book about civic consciousness. H-A-I-D-T, Haidt, called Righteous Minds,
yes,
which is an extraordinarily enlightening analysis of why it's so hard for people on the left and people on the right to talk with one another. And some of his insights, I think, really open the door to some greater understanding.
Well, I'm in communication, so this is a topic dear to my heart. And I found that establishing relationships, although very challenging with people who diametrically see the world differently from you, or maybe dislike you from the moment they lay eyes on you and want to reject whatever you have to say, or even your presence there, that it might be challenging and difficult, but patience, kindness, some empathy. I've learned that people who maybe come at you with a lot of hostility they're having some issues. And just being sort of kind and calm and quiet, and letting them speak and asking them about what's on their mind and what's important to them, what do they want in this life, you know, that sort of thing. You know, you're taking a kind of conversational, calm track can really open people up and reduce, you know, that kind of a desire to fight. But it does take quite a bit of patience on your part, and you have to take a little bit of abuse. So, you know, it's kind of how much are you willing to take, you know, at any given point? You know, we're all human after all.
Amen.
So, you know, we all have to pick our situations as we can handle them. So I won't say I've got, you know, the perfect answer, but I think maybe between the three of us and maybe a lot of other wise people in this room, you know, you can come to approaches that work for you and you know, help you in your work in the community.
Good.
Well, thank you so much. And could you all join me in thanking them for coming? And thank you for coming out.